Hello, this is Jonathan Samuels in for Neil Patterson on the Sky News Daily. Now today we are talking about the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, and asking whether or not he is having the toughest week of his premiership so far. One of the newspapers today had the headline, Rishi on the rack. Well, he has been giving evidence to the COVID inquiry, defending his past record as Chancellor, but he's also looking to the future, isn't he, as he defends his plan to send some asylum seekers to Rwanda. There is a crunch vote in the Commons tomorrow, and at this stage it really is uncertain which way it's going to go. So I'm going to be talking to Sky's political editor, Beth Rigby, who's been following the different Conservative factions who are unhappy with the bill. But first, here's Tamara Cohen, who has spent the day at the COVID inquiry. Great to see you, Tamara. Why don't we start by getting an overall impression? How do you think the Prime Minister did?
There were no fireworks. He was quite calm, quite controlled. He'd obviously done a lot of prep, a lot of revision over the weekend, because you saw him there sometimes saying, well, let me take you back to paragraph 237 of my statement. And actually on that day, the SAGE meeting, there was another thing going on as well. So look, I think he was very, very well prepared for it and trying to stay calm, not get too tetchy, although he did get a little tetchy at the end. And all in all, I think he was trying not to make loads of headlines out of this.
He was told, wasn't he, at one point, to keep his answers a bit more concise?
Yes, he was told to keep his answers concise because I think senior politicians, when they're asked a question, sometimes want to answer a slightly different question.
Really? I didn't know that.
I thought what was interesting was that one of the key backdrops to Rishi Sunak's evidence is this big interview he did in the Spectator magazine, a right-leaning magazine, last summer when he was running to be Tory leader, when he said it was called, what we knew at the time. And he basically said, I was sceptical about lockdown. The government didn't properly consider some of the trade-offs for school children, for example. He said that he was hitting a brick wall when he tried to mention these things. So there was this thought that maybe he would use this inquiry to say, look, I was raising all these concerns and no one was listening to me. But actually, he didn't really do that at all. He was quite supportive of Boris Johnson and his decision-making. He didn't actually particularly disagree with the decisions the government took at that time. He said that he thought that they were informed by the scientists, and largely his criticism, he said, was of the communications, as in what people were saying in public, rather than the substance. So this idea that he was going to launch some big attack on the whole lockdown policy was really not borne out at all.
Yeah, fascinating. And he started his session by apologising. Let's have a listen.
I just wanted to start by saying how deeply sorry I am to all of those who lost loved ones, family members through the pandemic, and also all those who suffered in the various different ways throughout the pandemic and as a result of the actions were taken. I've thought a lot about this over the past couple of years. It's important that we learn the lessons so that we can be better prepared in the future, and it is in that spirit and with enormous respect for all of those who are affected that I'm here today, and I look forward to giving evidence in a spirit of constructive candour to help the inquiry with its deliberations.
So he said he was sorry, perhaps a now obligatory apology. We had an apology from Boris Johnson, from Michael Gove, from Dominic Cummings. He said he was deeply sorry for people suffering as a result of the actions that were taken. He didn't go any further than that in terms of his own responsibility for them. And we heard some of the families outside saying it wasn't good enough. It's clear that everyone at this inquiry has had a chance to reflect deeply on just how significant the whole thing was. 230,000 dead, countless other victims. And I think it does weigh heavily on everybody who gives evidence there.
One of the big issues in the run-up to today was how he was going to answer questions about Eat Out to Help Out, because with hindsight, it perhaps was quite a controversial policy. Let's just have a listen to some of what he said.
My primary concern was protecting millions of jobs of particularly vulnerable people who worked in this industry. All the data, all the evidence, all the polling, all the input from those companies suggested that unless we did something, many of those jobs would have been at risk with devastating consequences for those people and their families. And that's why independent think tanks had recommended doing something like this. Indeed, other countries had done something like this because everyone was grappling with the same issue of how to ensure that those jobs are safeguarded because people return. And that was the primary driver for what we were doing.
Yeah, that was interesting. So Rishi Sunak's known for two policies, furlough and eat out to help out. And you can tell which one he'd rather be talking about. And on eat out to help out, the accusation made by other people at this inquiry has been that he didn't tell anyone about it. He didn't ask the scientists for their input. So the whole narrative has been that the Treasury went a bit rogue doing this, and Chris Whitty, of course, memorably called it Eat Out to Help the Virus. So this scheme was to basically give people a discount on eating out at restaurants in order to help the hospitality sector. And it was for the month of August 2020. Now, Rishi Sunak was very defensive of it. He said it was announced in July to start in August, so they had plenty of time to raise concerns about it. The counsel for the inquiry, Hugo Keith, said, well, why didn't you personally go and ask them about it? Why didn't you say, is this going to increase the prevalence of the virus? And Rishi Sunak said, look, the opening up of the first lockdown began in May, and this was all very much within that. Some hospitality was allowed to open from July, as long as people followed. And he mentioned there was 100 pages of guidance about social distancing and how far apart the tables could be and how many people could be at each table. And he said all this was very much worked out in advance and he was acting within those rules.
Now, at one point in the inquiry today, he was asked about this phrase pro-death squad, which we're told some in Number 10 were calling the Treasury. What did he have to say about that?
Yes, there were several mentions of that. So Angela McLean, who was then a government scientist and is now doing Patrick Vallence's job, she's now the chief scientific advisor, she referred to him in an email as Dr. Death, the Chancellor, seemingly a reference to Eat Out to Help Out. Boris Johnson referred to the pro-death squads at the Treasury. So this does seem to be a bit of a theme. And right at the end of his evidence, Rishi Sunak was asked, did you know about this? Did you know that people were saying this about you? And he looked quite wounded and said, no, I didn't, but it's not fair characterisation of the people at the Treasury, who he said worked incredibly hard, saved millions of people's jobs through the furlough scheme, which was internationally acclaimed. And he said that this was absolutely unfair on what they were doing. Understandably, he was the Chancellor and he wanted to prioritise the economy, and in particular the often young, often female, often low-paid people who worked in the hospitality industry who, you know, when we look back, we remember talking about what a difficult time they were having. So he's very, very much defending his record on that against some in government who said it was absolutely the wrong thing to do in terms of the spread of the virus.
He'll be very relieved that today is over. Do you think that he's come out of it pretty well and actually he's got more pressing matters now on his mind?
I think it was less controversial for him than some of the other events today and within his party. Rishi Sunak's slight scepticism about some of the lockdown measures is generally something regarded positively within the Conservative Party, unlike a lot of the other things that Rishi Sunak is currently grappling with. But I think, yes, he will be relieved because it takes him back to a period that he doesn't want to think about, because he was Boris Johnson's right-hand man, effectively, at number 11 during what was a very controversial period. And I think Rishi Sunak's very much tried to distance himself from a lot of that period, a lot of what happened under Boris Johnson. So this is taking him back to that time. And I think he'll very much be thinking about how he survives as Prime Minister, given all the other things that are going on.
Tamara, thank you very much for your analysis. I'm going to put my coat on. We're going to take a short break. And after that, I'm going to hunt down our political editor, Beth Rigby, somewhere in Westminster. So I'm here outside Portcullis House, just opposite the Houses of Parliament. Lovely, crisp winter's afternoon here. And I'm joined by our political editor, Beth Rigby. Nice to see you, Beth.
It's nice to see you.
We've just heard, haven't we? It's all very exciting. Just heard from those on the right of the Conservative Party who have big concerns about this Rwanda bill. Update us. What did they say?
I mean, Jonathan, you know it's busy when the big guns like you are out here with me, like following me around to Parliament. But yeah, we are on a very live moving story today, because the Prime Minister's Rwanda legislation is meant to go through the House tomorrow, the second reading where MPs will vote on it. but by goodness, it is turning into a bun fight. And we knew it was going to be contentious as soon as he announced the plan. His immigration minister, Robert Jenrick, resigned. He said it's not hard enough, that the legislation isn't watertight enough to prevent legal challenges, to get flights off the ground in meaningful numbers. And now it's just rolling out, Jonathan. So we've just come out of a meeting of what is known as the Star Chamber. Now, effectively what that is, it's people that advise the Brexiteer ERG group, lawyers and experts, and they've gone through the bill. So the bill gets published by them, they've gone through it line by line, and they've concluded that it is partial and incomplete. Effectively, they don't think it's good enough to do what it says on the tin. And now the Prime Minister is in quite a world of pain, I would say.
And they're even saying that it might be better to start with a fresh bill, to scrap it all together. They're meant to be voting on it tomorrow.
So you were here when Mark Francois, who's the chair of the ERG, came out. There was a meeting of representatives in Portcullis House. I think it was in the Thatcher room or the Grimmond room, but anyway, there's 5 different groupings on the right that met. Now, test me, I'll see if I can remember. ERG, the Common Sense Group, the Conservative Growth Group, the New Conservatives, and the Northern Research Group, right? Representing 100 plus MPs. They met representatives to discuss the legislation. They came out and said it was partial. They then all went back in, partial and incomplete. They went back in, then they came out to a press conference, and between coming out and saying it was partial and incomplete to coming down to the microphones and the cameras outside Portcullis House, they then seemed to harden their position and say, not only does it need to be amended, but we think the government should pull the bill because in its current form, we're not satisfied with it. So now they've gone from saying it needs to change late morning to now saying that they think the bill should be amended. And the deputy chair of the ERG, David Jones, said he didn't think the bill was amendable in its current form, which is why they want it pulled.
It's incredible, really. So all those groups, well done for remembering them all as well. No notes, I was impressed.
Are you going to give me, I don't know, a pat on the head later?
Maybe.
Thank you. I'll take
you can have that, definitely. Let's also talk about that other group of Tory MPs who aren't happy. And they're not happy for different reasons. This
is when you try and take the middle way. On the other side of the party, there's the One Nation group, and that's the mainstream group of the party. They also have concerns about the bill because, if in essence on the right of the party, there's a group that think you need to pull out of the European Convention on Human Rights and other international obligations in order to just be able to completely block legal rulings, ignore legal rulings, because these claims go through our courts and then they get put up to the courts in Strasbourg. They think that the only way through is to pull out of all these treaties. The government have decided that is not the solution. But on the mainstream side of the party, the One Nation group, they're really worried that this might break our international obligations, comes within perhaps the inch of what's legal. So they are also going through the bill, and they are having a meeting tonight at 6 p.m. And then we're going to hopefully hear from Damien Green, the chair of that group, at about 7 p.m, while they'll give their verdict on what they think should go ahead.
Meanwhile, the boats are still coming, the planes aren't taking off. How much rests on this bill when it comes to Rishi Sunak's future?
Well, I mean, look, I likened it to Brexit last week, and the reason I did was it's, of course, a completely different issue. But what you've got is a prime minister in the middle of a divide within his party that is essentially irreconcilable, which is what Brexit was like. And you remember how that ended. First, Boris Johnson, Theresa May ended up losing her premiership over it. Boris Johnson ended up expelling a group of Conservatives that would not vote for his no-deal Brexit, some of the Remainers. He expelled a load of them from the party, people like Ken Clarke and Amber Rudd, the former Home Secretary. And the Prime Minister now is in a similar position where he has two irreconcilable sides of the party, and both of them threatening to vote this bill down at second reading if they don't get their way. Now, to put it in the context, I'd say a couple of things. You only need 29 MPs to vote against for it to fall. You only need 57 to abstain for it to fall, and it's quite chaotic. So there are routes within people might abstain and it falls. The other point of it, though, is that although the Prime Minister hasn't said this is a vote of confidence in him, many of his MPs might feel that this is the best thing we've got. Let's pass it now. Maybe we can amend it further down the stage. They have what is called committee stage, which is basically when people go away and they go through the bill, and then MPs can table amendments to the bill. And then do the hardliners on the right or on the mainstream of the party try and change the bill further down the track? So it might be that the Prime Minister gets this passed tomorrow, right? But then he's kicking the can down the road for this huge blow-up later on in early 2024, where MPs try and vote against it. But I have to say, when I look at it, the right of the party seems to be irreconcilable on what they think needs to be done. He's lost an immigration minister. He's got a former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, who is going absolutely tonto about it as well. And you've got a Prime Minister whose authority, whether he calls it a confidence vote or not, is resting on this bill, which looks really, really hard to get through. And I think the question for me, Jonathan, is you have to go back for months and think, why did the Prime Minister in the first place make this his hill to die on when it is so divisive within the party? Because it's not just, the past couple of weeks, the whole issue about staying in or out of the European Convention of Human Rights has come up. This has been a discussion for months. The Prime Minister, meanwhile, for the public, has promised that those flights will get off next spring. And now, having said that he will lead a government of accountability, professionalism, integrity, what he's actually leading is what looks like a warring party, where lots of voters might say this looks really unprofessional. Just get on with delivering the policy.
And that was also almost going to be my next question. Why are we here again, the Conservative Party, pressing that self-destruct button, only months potentially away from a general election?
And I think that's a good question, and I think it's a reflection of divides that have blown up over Brexit, and then Boris Johnson and Liz Truss and then Rishi Sunak. You have a party that is unmanageable, right? You have MPs that are looking like they're staring down the barrel, thinking that they're going to lose their seats, thinking this is every man or woman for themselves, trying to save their own skin in their constituency. Discipline has completely fallen away. And the thing about a Prime Minister is authority doesn't just come from having the job. It comes from leading the party and showing that you're a winner. And Rishi Sunak has been Prime Minister now for a year. The polls are not getting any better. And there is absolute despair in the party, and part of the rows and the divisions is a reflection of the desperation that MPs feel, and there is talk around here. I had a conversation with an MP the other day saying, if Boris Johnson was still in Parliament, there would be a push to maybe reinstall him as leader. And you're kind of, I'm through the looking glass. You've changed Prime Minister 3 times. You are months away, or at most a year away from a general election. And we're now considering, as a parliamentary party, you're considering whether or not to change leader again. And for Rishi Sunak, I think that the divisions within the party and the chaos of it reflects that he's losing a grip. And I think that kind of this vote, whether he likes it or not, is hugely symbolic as to whether he can survive into the long run. There's questions about whether there might be a confidence vote in terms of letters going into the 1922 backbench chair, which is Sir Graham Brady. If enough MPs put letters in, it triggers a confidence vote. Now, I think Rishi Sunak would win that. He's got 150 MPs that were backing him. But what a position to get into this far out from election, when Tories will say to me, we should be taking the fight to Labour, not fighting amongst ourselves. Look, there's still a long way to go in this. Now I would say there's a question about whether they do pull the bill. Does he try and face down the rebels? and lose, or does he face down rebels and call their bluff and get it through? Because there's enough MPs in the party that doesn't want to completely detonate a prime minister, which is basically what it would be. I mean, this is just one, counter thought to the, because we've got a partial story at the moment. This is from a senior figure in the One Nation group. They said to me that they think the bill will probably pass tomorrow. Now, I have to say they haven't met yet, but this is what one figure's saying to me. But also said amendments would split the party again, so the government would do well to resist them. But of course, the other side are asking for amendments, so it is a real nightmare at Christmas here for the Prime Minister. And Jonathan, at the moment, I just don't know how it's going to land.
No. Well, we should let you get back to it and trying to find the answers.
So much to do. I need to go and get some lunch, refuel, and off I go again.
Thanks so much. So as Beth runs off to get a sandwich, we will leave it there. Thank you very much for your company. That was the Sky News Daily with me, Jonathan Samuels.